Chapter 16. I entered the park. It was still light. That was good. I also knew exactly how to find the tents. That was even better. I just hoped that Jack was going to be there. Be there and sober enough to talk to me. As I walked, I looked continually around me. Nobody was going to sneak up on me. Up my left sleeve was a metal bar. I brought it with me just in case. I'd rather run, though, if I had a choice. I really didn't know if I could use it. I skipped off the path and onto the little dirt trail. I moved as fast as I could, careful for the roots and the rocks in the ground and the branches blocking the way. Soon the little fire was visible through the trees, before the tents could be seen. I entered the clearing and saw Jack immediately. He was sitting in one of the canvas chairs. There was nobody else to be seen. I yelled out a greeting. He didn't move or react. Maybe he hadn't heard me. "Hey, Jack," I said as I stopped beside him. His eyes were closed and his head slumped over to one side, slightly snoring. He was asleep or passed out. "Jack," I called a little louder. Still no response. There was an empty bottle at his feet and he smelled of alcohol. He wasn't just asleep. Maybe I should just leave. Maybe I shouldn't. I gave him a little shake. "Hey, Jack, it's me, Ian." He roused and his eyes popped open. With heavy eyelids, he looked at me. At first there was only a dull glare, like he didn't even know me. Then his eyes cleared and he smiled. "Hey, Ian, how are you doing?" His words were slurred. It was obvious that he was drunk. "I'm good. You?" "Fine. I must have fallen asleep." "I'm sorry I woke you up," I said, though obviously not that sorry. I wouldn't have done it. "That's okay," he stretched. "You know, I've been thinking about Rwanda a lot lately." "Me too. Most of the time over the last few years I've tried hard not to think about it," he said. "I didn't mean to dredge up bad memories for you," I apologized. He shrugged. "Some things are better talked about. It wasn't like I'd forgotten about it. It's not like I'll ever forget about it. It's just that I didn't know how really awful it was." He scowled. "You still don't know how awful it was. Nobody who wasn't there could ever know. Of course, I didn't mean anything. Of course, I don't really know." He reached up and patted my hand. "I shouldn't have snapped like that. You're a good boy." He shook his head and smiled. "Been remembering lots of things. Thinking about being a kid, about my mother and father. My mother used to say to me, 'Jacques, you have to know.'" "Jacques? I thought your name was Jack," I said, cutting him off. "Jack is what they call me around here. Jacques, what my parents named me." "I didn't know that. What should I call you?" He didn't answer right away. "Jacques would be fine. It would be nice to hear my name sometimes. It would remind me of who I was, once a long time ago." "Sure, Jacques." He smiled. "You said that like with a little French accent. Do you speak any French?" "Just grade 10 high school French. Enough to order pizza, find a washroom, or read a sign or directions." "So you're French?" "French Canadian. Both parts are important. Both parts are to be proud of." His eyes closed and he stopped talking. I wasn't sure if he was thinking or if he'd passed out. "Jacques?" "Yeah? You were saying you were proud to be Canadian and French." He nodded in agreement. "I am. You know, one of the reasons I was assigned to Rwanda was because I spoke French." "That's right. That's one of the official languages, along with English and Kinyarwanda. It's not good just to speak one language." "I speak some Spanish," I said. "How is it that you speak Spanish?" "I don't really speak it as much as I understand it. I learned it from Berta. She was my nanny when I was little, and now she is our housekeeper. But really, she's more than that. She's from Guatemala." "Guatemala is a beautiful country. I guess she could probably tell you stories about the things that go on there." "She told me stories about growing up," I said. "Has she told you stories about the disappeared?" I shook my head. What was he talking about? "Not surprised she has, and who wants to talk of those things?" I didn't know what he meant. "So you were telling me about something your mother told you." "Yeah, that's right. My mother would say to me, 'Jacques, the world is nothing but a battle between good and the devil, between good and evil. A constant battle. In Rwanda I saw evil win the battle.'" Jacques got up from the chair. He struggled to get to his feet and staggered. For a second I thought he was going to tumble backwards, but before he regained his balance. "You see that jacket?" he said, pointing to a coat lying on the ground beside one of the tents. "Yeah." That was a strange question. "When I see it, do you know what I think? I think it's a body. I can't see a shirt or even a rag lying there without thinking there's a body underneath." "Did you notice where they'd piled up branches by the playground, branches they'd pruned from the dead trees?" "No," I said, shaking my head. "When I see them, I don't see branches. I see limbs, human limbs. I see arms and legs cut off and stacked like firewood, because that's what I've seen. Those are memories that are seared into my mind. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to bring all that back." "You didn't bring it back because it never went away," he said. "It won't ever go away. How hard I try to forget, no matter what I do or think. But maybe that's right. Somebody has to remember. Somebody has to grieve for the loss. Somebody. It was then that I noticed he was crying. Tears were freely flowing down his cheeks. I wanted to say something, do something, put my arm around him, but I just stood there feeling awkward and stupid and helpless. And do you know what the worst part of the whole thing was? He asked. I couldn't even imagine which part from the others could be worse. None of it had to happen. We could have stopped it. We saw it coming and they wouldn't listen. Who? Who wouldn't listen? I was struggling to form words. The United Nations. They sent us to perform a mission and then wouldn't let us do what we needed. They wouldn't give us the men or the equipment or the permission to do what we knew we had to do. Had to be done. He wiped the tears away with the back of a dirty sleeve. Just a few hundred more men, more ammunition for our guns. Permission to seize the arms. We knew we were being built up, that they were eventually used to genocide. A plane to jam the radio signals of that station that was spewing out hate and violence. The orders to capture the key men, the devils, who orchestrated the massacres. All of this could have been done, was within our reach, but they would not let us. And do you know why? I shook my head ever so slightly. Not only didn't I have an answer, I was so transfixed that I could hardly budge. Racism, he said, the word hardly audible. This genocide was an act of complete and utter racism. But you said that the two main groups were both black, were almost the same, I said. The racism did not involve them, it involved us. The United Nations knew what was going on. The United States, Great Britain, France, Russia, Canada. We all knew, but we did not step in. Who cares if it's a bunch of savages, a faceless mass of ignorant blacks get killed? So what? It's just less of them to die of starvation or AIDS or some other disease. Less of them to feed and take care of. Who cares? He yelled, and his face was a mask of anger and hatred. I stepped back. We stood there helpless, no worse than helpless. We stood by and were witnesses to the atrocities we couldn't stop. He picked up a stick and poked the embers of the fire. I knew his actions had less to do with tending the flames and more to do with trying to compose himself. All that is required for evil to prevail is for good men to do nothing, Jacques said. What? Eamon Burke. For evil to triumph, all that is required is for good men to do nothing. In Rwanda I served with some of the best, most noble men I've ever been privileged to know. We tried to do something. We wanted to do something. We were not allowed. Even worse, we were not allowed to turn away. We were forced to watch. Watch as the churches turned from places of sanctuary to scenes of carnage. Watch as streets became painted with red with blood, where the bodies were so many that they were carried away in dump trucks, where torn and tattered human beings were left to die on corners or in fields, where the hospitals couldn't hope to help the masses that were brought there. I have seen so much, so very much. He started to cry again. He looked up at me. You have to know that we tried. We really tried. I know you did. You did everything you could. We provided sanctuary places where we could protect some people. We arranged convoys where people could be taken through the lines to safety. We went out every day and saved some people from mobs, supervised those convoys, putting our lives in the middle, willing to lay down our lives to save those people. We couldn't stop it, but we slowed it down, just a little. He started to cry even harder. You have to know that we tried. We really tried. He choked out the words between sobs. I know you did. You did everything you could. His entire body shook violently, like he was going to become physically ill. He took a deep breath. We did our best. I know you did. You know, I wouldn't blame you if you believe me. Sometimes I have trouble believing it. I think back to all the things we did, the things we didn't do, the things we could have done, or should have done, or might have done. I tried to remember the lives that were saved, that we saved. Instead, all I can remember is the victims, the countless number of victims. They became statistics, I said, recalling my teacher's words, the words of Joseph Stalin. Joseph Stalin, the mass murderer. I try to understand the numbers, Jacques said. I think about 9/11, about the planes crashing into the Twin Towers. What a tragedy. I nodded my head. I still think about that sometimes. My parents both worked in office buildings, and the images of those planes crashing into the buildings and then the towers tumbling down was so clear in my mind. Think about that happening, and then the next day, two more planes crashing into two more towers, and then it happened the next day and the next day and the next day. But it didn't just happen for a week, it happened every day for 265 days in a row. If you can imagine that, then you can imagine the number of people that were killed in Rwanda. That's almost impossible to comprehend. It is. And for us in Rwanda, it was like watching the planes crashing and going to the airport and telling them not to let any more planes leave. But nobody listened to us, and 2 more planes took off and crashed. And we went back to warn them, and another 2 planes took off, and 2 more the next day and the next. He let his sentence trail off. I stood there too stunned and scared and confused to know what to say, even if I should try to say something. Standing in front of me was this man, this big man, this man who had been strong, so powerful, so noble, and now was just this. And I knew why he had become what he had become. He was just another victim of Rwanda.